Hey, and welcome to part 3 of the series. We are in this one going to take a look at the particles. And in many ways, this is kind of just a technical setup because all the art direction comes from the smoke simulation. The smoke simulation will drive all the particles, and we will do very little in terms of actual art direction and creative direction in the particle system. But let's set it up and I'll talk you through how I go about doing that. So we're in the same scene as we were when we left last time. We have our smoke here. The only thing I did change was I did a higher res sim on this pyro where I increased the substeps just so that I had a little bit more resolution in terms of the movement. You can see it breaks up a little bit nicer with higher substeps. And this one I left exactly the same. So you can see here's our ball. It hits and then it moves. All right, so let's create a popnet. And this is going to be our small particles. And what we can do is we can just pop in our, what are these? The smoke simulations into input 2 and 3. And for input 1, I'm going to create a box. And I want this box to be quite small. And we can make it quite big and big. So let's just view it. And this can even be smaller. I want something super thin that we can just fill with particles. And then let's maybe bring it a little bit closer here. I've spoken about this before, but what I want to do here is just create enough particles that the velocity will move and you won't see any like difference between the static particles and the moving particles. But I also don't want to create such a big bound that I have to simulate too many points. So let's just jitter those up and give it a bit more resolution. So we're at 238,000. So I know that I ended up doing, I think, 8 million. And then somebody told me about this AE Cull camera, and I've been using this instead of the one that I was using before. And so it's a part of the AE libs. So we can just give it our main camera here. And you can see now it just cuts off. So I was at 238,000 and now I'm at 142,000. And you can also give it a little bit more margin. So we'll do that, something like that. And let's just give it a slightly higher resolution. So we're at now 1 million. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good. And so what we can do now is pop that into here. And what I want to do here is just clean all these attributes because this gives us cam dist and NDC and these funny attributes. I don't want any of those. I just want points. So we can go back to the beginning. And inside here, I need to set this to be all points. And I just want it to birth on the first frame. Okay, so we can get rid of this. If I turn this on, we should, you can see we have our points. I'm going to turn off this guard, and if we play, nothing happens because we have no forces, we have no gravity, nothing. So now we can use a pop advect by volumes, and then this just takes a volume field and we can just use, let's say, the second context velocity. We'll update velocity and hit play, and you can see it now moves our particles. So particles, it's sometimes hard to see what's actually going on, but let's just merge our ball here just so we have a slightly better visualization. So the ball comes in and then boom, the particles fly around, and just like that, that looks pretty cool. It's maybe a little bit strong. And one of the things I want to check is that there's no cutoff, and you can see at the back here how this is getting cut off. And now maybe with motion, with depth of field, you won't see that. But what I'll do is just add, I wonder if I can get this to look a little better. I'll just add a little bit more at the back. So let's go here, just pull this back a little bit more. And this is real time. I'm not speeding this video up. It's still really fast, even with whatever it is, 100 or 1 million points, 2 million points. And the sides are cutting off, but remember that's based on our camera, so we don't see that. And I think that looks pretty cool. So the other thing I want to do now is bring in the other velocity. And you don't have to, you could leave it just with one velocity. I did one render, this one over here, that just has the one velocity, and I think it looked cool, and then I wanted to play with the other one, so I did the next one, and that's this one over here. And this one has kind of the shockwave. So let's talk about how we would add that. So what I ended up doing was just adding a second pop advect by volumes, and you can merge them or put them in line. sometimes it's nicer to merge them. It looks a little neater. So this one I'm going to say is the hit, and then this one will be the shockwave. And this is going to be the third context geometry, and I'm going to make this one a lot lower. And if we take a look now, you'll see that it radically changes the movement, and that's because they kind of compete against each other. So now I have like this ripple, which is quite hard to see, but the hit is a lot lower because we have two different velocities. So I found that what I had to do was kind of really push the one and then also push this one. And then with the shockwave, I can also turn down the velocity blend, so there's less of the shockwave. And then if I hit play, now we get that spike again. You can see it over there. And if we go into our camera, you can see the main one is hitting it. And if we go a little bit more forward, and this again is still real time, I'm not doing anything else. You can see that this is going a little bit crazy here. And so maybe we need to just turn down the shockwave. Less of that. Let's try again. And this is where I say it's not really about art direction. It's just about kind of fiddling and trying different settings to see what works. And it's still exploding. So something we can do is just turn this one off. Let's just hit play. So you can see what the shockwave is doing. It's got quite a big impact, even with such low settings. So let's just go even further down. All right, I think that's better. This is kind of what I want. I just want this gentle like shockwave going out like that. And then the hit is going to be the main thing that's doing its thing. So let's combine them and see what happens. All right, so it's still going pretty wild. If we look at our camera, and if you look at the second one over here, you can see that at the end, it does actually get pretty wild. So I had very similar results. It's just that I only actually used these few frames and I slowed it down a lot. And so again, you can sit in here and play with this, and maybe we need to turn down this velocity. And I think it's because we're combining two velocity fields and it's fighting against each other. Or maybe it's injecting velocity into each other. Okay, that feels a little more calm. So you can play with these settings and you can dial it in and figure out what you want. And as I said again, of course, we can also just disable this and go, let's take this over here, and I'm going to just have this. So this is the combined, and then this is the normal. So we can have 0.05 and 1. And with just this one, it does also look pretty cool. So if we have a look now at the main, you can see we have this. So I'm going to just leave this one for now because it's a lot faster to compute as well. And you can play with the other ones because you see it in there. Okay, so that's for now the small particles. And we can file cache this. And I don't think I need 250 frames. We'll go with 150. All right, so this is it now saved. And it's still going pretty wild, even with just the one hit. And if we have a look at our smoke sim over here, I'm not sure why it's going so wild, because this doesn't look as wild as that. And maybe it's a matter of just toning down some of the movement in the smoke sim. But you'll see when we get to the retiming part that we can kind of tone this down, because we're only going to use, let's say, 10 frames of this, and we're going to slow it down a lot, and then the rest of it we don't really need. But of course, as we spoke about in part 2, you can play a lot with the settings inside this smoke solver. We've got this turbulence and displacement, which I think are doing a lot of the hitting and the shredding as well. It gives it a lot of this small movement, and I think that's what we're getting here. The other thing I didn't do here was I didn't add in my colliders, so I'm going to do that. I want to add a ground plane. So let's just dive inside here and add a ground plane. I'll merge the ground plane with that. And this is just going to give the particles on the bottom something to collide with. and some are below, but that should be fine. We'll see soon. And then we also want to bring in our ball. So just as we did before, we'll just grab this ball over here, ball animation. And we could use the actual VDB, but I don't need to do that. I don't need this to be super specific, just so that the particles don't go flying through here. So let's merge these two. Okay, and then this, we'll use the syntax op input path, and then we can just grab one of the inputs of our .NET, which is the third one. There's our ball there. We want to use deforming geometry, and let's just see our collision. Okay, so that actually looks pretty good. We'll go to by size and just make this a little bit lower. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. It's pretty low res, but as I said, it doesn't need to be perfect for this to work. So we can go like that. And then one of the things that I need to do here is just make sure that I'm only outputting my pop object so that it doesn't do everything else. And then let's just increase the sub steps, just because we have a few different things going on. Just help it calculate everything it needs to calculate, and let's hit save. Okay, so we now have this. I have this weird bug in Houdini where if I don't have this turned off, even though I'm on a file cache, it still tries to cache. It's pretty annoying. Okay, so we have that, and we have our colliders in place, and this is looking pretty cool. So the next thing I did was I did some retiming, and the way that I did that was I started with the ball. So we can just drop down a retime node right over here before we render. I'm just going to color this maybe purple, just so that I know which ones I'm doing. I actually want to do it up here so that it can go into the hairs as well, so that everything is retimed on the side by this. So let's do that. Good to be organized. Okay. What we can do is we can start off maybe a little bit faster so that the ball comes flying in, and then as it hits, now it's going to hit over here, and maybe it goes 1 or 2 frames more. Then we can keyframe this, and it's going to go really slow, maybe 0.1, boom, and then everything moves. And then at frame 100 we can, whatever, we can go back up to 1 maybe. Maybe this needs to be faster too. Yeah, okay, so that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Control Shift and Alt, and then I drag it and it creates this reference copy, and I can drop this in over here. So this should now do the same thing for here. And you can see it works pretty well. So let's just merge these two together and do a super quick flipbook, just because the playback in the viewport is pretty slow. Okay, so you can see that's working pretty well. And we need a lot more particles. I can see already that this is not enough. Like this is pretty hollow, and I want this to be quite filled out. So we'll do another sim with a ton more particles. But for now, we'll leave this as is, and we'll come back and just fill this out in a bit. The next thing I want to do is just fill out these areas. Maybe put a little bit more at the back and a little bit more in the front. And to do this, what I did was I just copied this. And you can see how this is where this one started. So I can just pull this like this. So there's a little bit of an overlap, something like that. And I can just pop this in. And I also want to make sure I'm only getting the particles that I'm actually going to render, and then we can clean off attributes. So now we have the front of that, and we can do this whole thing again for the back. And maybe this one needs to be a bit bigger and maybe a bit shorter. I don't need too many at the back, but that just helps. So if we merge these, then what I can do is after this retime, I can merge all of these, because I don't need these particles to be retimed as there's no animation on them. So now we have particles everywhere, and we can easily render these instance stuff onto these if we need to. As these are the small particles, I'm actually going to just render these as particles with the Redshift particle system, and then the slightly bigger ones I'm going to instance rocks onto. So let's build those bigger ones. Before I do that, I'm just going to quickly create a null and just say render small particles. do know I want attribute randomize and just grab a random color. That way I can just get this, and I think everything should be static because I'm not changing the points in the pop sim. They're the same number of points. And then I also want an attribute randomize just to get some random p scale. So let's set this to p scale. This is a single float value, and I'll set this to 0.4, and I know these need to be pretty small, maybe 0.1. We can come back and change that. Okay, so that's our small particles. We're basically going to do something very similar for our big particles. So I'm going to just take all of these and copy it across. One of the main differences is that in these points, I need a lot less points. So let's just go with something like this. And the other thing is I actually don't want any depth to this. So instead of this, I'm going to use a grid, and it can be about the same size. Maybe something like that. And because we're going to do so few of these, I can actually just simulate a few more. It doesn't really matter, and try and get as far forward and backwards as I can. Let's just make this bigger. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. And then what I'm going to do here is just scatter some points, and we can just make this, I don't know, maybe 10,000 points. Again, we can just cull the ones that we're not using like that, clean attributes, and you can see this gets pretty slow with the ground plane and the colliders and stuff. So for now, I'm going to turn this stuff off and turn this to 1 and 2, or what is it, 1 and 1 as a default, and let's just hit play now, and you can see it's basically faster than real time. And now we get this, which is what we want. But one of the things that I want to do is when I instance some rocks onto this, so for now, let's just create a box, make it really small, and copy to points. You can see that the orients of this are a bit weird. And if I do an attribute randomize, or a mops randomize, I want to randomize the orient. You can see now it's randomized the whole time, and I want to set it so that it, as they flying up, then it randomizes them, but everything else is how it originally was. And so what we can do here is just create an attribute randomize. We're going to set this to W, and we'll set this to inside sphere. So this is now just giving a random W attribute, which is just a random vector pointing in all sorts of ways. And what we can use inside this popnet is a pop spin node. Actually, let's do that over here. Okay, so the way that this works is you can give it an axis and you can tell it to spin. So if we just do this, I think it'll spin around one axis. Let's see. Okay, maybe not. I don't know. I guess it's the spin speed needs to be a lot higher. Okay, so now you can see that they're spinning, and obviously this is not what we want at all, but that's kind of the basic of the spin node. So what we want to do is we want a random axis for each of the points, and we want a random spin speed that's based on the movement of the particles. So only particles that are moving are going to spin. So it's pretty easy to set that up. We need an axis, and if you go through here and you say pass through, you can see we have spin speed and we have axis. So I'm going to do these the other way around. So axis is going to be a random number, and we know we have IDs, so I'm going to say random at ID, and I want to, I don't know if normalize is the right word, but I want a value between 0.5, minus 0.5 and 0.5, so I can just subtract 0.5 from my ID, because this is 0 to 1, and then minus will be minus 0.5 to 0.5. So now I just have a random axis, and then spin speed is going to be, I can multiply what I have up the top there, so 360. So now it'll spin all the way around, but I can randomize it based on my ID. And I should be declaring these randomized by ID. And then the other thing I want to do is randomize it by the velocity, length. So basically, if the particles are moving, they get a velocity, and the length of that is like how fast they're moving. So if they're moving a lot, then they'll spin more. And if they're not moving, they won't spin at all, which makes sense because particles that are moving would then spin. So as these go, they should spin. And maybe I need a little bit more spin. They seem like they're picking up some spin of their own. I realize that I'm not even actually using this W. I created it in my project, but I never used it. So I can just get rid of it. So this is multiplied by 5 just to see if this is giving it some more. Okay, so you can see now that they are rotating and this movement is a bit weird. So let's just increase this velocity. All right, so that looks a little bit better. And again, we're going to retime this. So let's just steal this retime and put it over here just to see that this is doing what we want. Okay, that's cool. So you're still getting a lot of spin in some of these and then it goes crazy. So that looks pretty cool. And this one is so fast because there's so few points. I don't need to file cache it just yet. And maybe this is too much spin. So let's just turn this down. Let's turn this down. Okay, so let's talk about instancing stuff onto these points. And again, I have spoken about this before, but we'll do it again just because it's a useful thing to have. I'm going to use an RBD material fracture. And this just turns this into random pieces. So if I do an exploded view, you see I have these pieces. And this is perfect for now. We have, how many pieces do we have? I guess it doesn't really matter. We'll figure it out in a second. The next thing I did was I ended up subdividing this. And the reason for this is I wanted these pieces to feel like little pieces of clay, not hard fractured rocks like this. These hard edges, when you render it, it didn't feel super like clay. And just a little bit of roundness felt a lot better. So I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to assemble these. I don't want this inside the... like that. Okay, so let's create pack primitives, and now we can see we have 25, and that's cool. And then we can enumerate these and just give them a variant attribute, and this way we can just copy a random piece per point, just the normal variant workflow. And then we need a point or an attribute wrangle, and we just want to set these at world 0. So we can just set this, each piece to be 0. So now they're all at the kind of home base. And so when we use a attribute from pieces, we can pipe that in over here. So this is our points, and then this is our geometry lookup. And we want to look up the variant attribute, and we want it to be just random. And then over here, we want to set this as variant and pipe that in there. So now we have these cool rocks that are moving. And what we want to now do is just do an attribute randomize, and we want to randomize p-scale. And we need this to be 1 and 0.4. And now we can kind of see that we need these to be a lot smaller. So let's just take a look at our camera. Maybe these can be a little bit bigger. Okay, so these are too big. Maybe 1 is right. Okay, and remember we have these ones as well, so we can merge this in just to kind of preview how this is looking. Maybe we want to merge in all of these. So these pieces here are more just about like filling in and giving a variety of different shapes. And there they are there. They look pretty cool and pretty convincing, I think. Well, they weren't physically accurate, as many people pointed out, but I think they were pretty cool. And maybe what we want to do here is just make a few more of these. And this is super fast, so we can easily just do 20,000 points. And let's turn on all our colliders and stuff, and then let's just file cache this. Alrighty, so now we have all our particles and our big rocks that are kind of stashed in there. And when we get to rendering, maybe we need to make these a little bit smaller. It's hard to tell right now. Okay, so we have our big particles and we have our small particles. The only other thing we need to do is to retime our smoke sims and get them ready to output. And this is quite messy. This does happen because we have the same thing going all over the show. Let's move this up. So we have two different smoke sims and we want to retime them. What I found was when I tried to retime them directly like this, we obviously need to change the velocities. So let's do bar at vectored so we can use vel. And okay, that seems to be working. Sometimes it didn't and I had to create a new one, but I think that was a bug and maybe it'll come back, but we can now just add a null and render smoke. No, this isn't hit, this is the shockwave. All right, and so now we have all the pieces that we need, I think, and we can, are these packed? Yeah, these are packed. Okay, so render rocks. So when we pipe these in, we can render those as packed objects. And now we have all the pieces that we need to render. Let's do one final step and just add some more particles here. This is a huge mess. Up. Okay, so for now I'm going to just leave that, but okay, 10 million, and here I have 7 million, so it's maybe too many. Maybe we go 3, 5. Okay, I think 4 million is a good amount. So let's save this. I'm going to save this and I will see you in the next part where we render and I won't change anything else. All right, so I decided I want to do one quick flipbook and I'll share it with you. So this is with the more particles and I think this is enough, maybe not, and we'll have to add some more, but we'll keep it as this for rendering and then see. And there's some craziness going on here, but I think what we'll do is we'll cut it at maybe frame 115 because we don't need to see it so it goes so wild. So something like that looks pretty good. All right, so that's what we have for this one. I'll see you in the last part where we'll put it all together and render it, and hopefully it works. Otherwise, we'll do a few more sims just to kind of get everything to look the way that it needs to. I will see you in the last part.